There's a little something that I touched on in my previous video about Tron Ares and how disappointing it was. And I realized that it provided context for me to talk about something that's been on my mind for a long time, which is the idea of a story as an emotional experience. And that includes both science fiction and fantasy, and the emotional experiences that reading those types of stories of the fantastic, give us. A lot of this was provoked originally by a video that I saw from a screenwriting coach, a guy named Corey Mandel, and the video is entitled "The Best Writers in the World Use This Process to Structure Their Stories." I'm going to link to that in the description. And what he says at about the 5.5-minute mark or so, he says, writers don't start a story with what are the events. They don't start with the order of the events, the plot, that is. He said, they start with the experience that they want the audience to have. And they map that out, and then all they have to do is find events that create those experiences, the feelings that we have, the rising and falling feeling, the plunging into despair, and then the climb back to victory, that kind of thing. And I used to think that science fiction was chiefly about ideas and that fantasy was chiefly about feeling, and that was a good way to separate those two things. And I've since discarded this idea because the two, either one of them can be about ideas, either one of them can be about feeling. And my sense is that both of them at some point need to be about feeling, because all good fiction is about a feeling, is about having an emotional experience with something. Roger Ebert once talked about movies as being engines of emotion, that they may not be the greatest thing in the world for advancing a logical argument, but they're fantastic for getting us to share a feeling or a state of mind, even if that thing doesn't, especially if that thing doesn't necessarily lend itself to being described in so many words. This is basically the whole of David Lynch's cinema. So, and I've said before that if we're going to talk about a big difference between science fiction and fantasy, it's not because one is more about emotions and one is more about ideas. It's more about the worldview in my purview. Science fiction is more about the postmodern to modern worldview, and fantasy is more embracing about the pre-modern to modern worldview. But both kinds of stories, at their peak, are driven by what kinds of emotions they evoke in us and how they bring us on an emotional journey. Now, a lot of us will start a story, whether science fiction or fantasy, with an idea, a big what if. I do this all the time myself. It's a very convenient place to start. But I don't stop with the idea. I realize that an idea by itself is not a story. A story happens to people. So then what I do is I find people who will embody the different facets of that what if, of how it becomes incarnate in the world. Who are the kinds of people that would be affected by the presence of this what if? What sorts of lives are they going to lead? And then the drama and the emotional experience that we have will unfold from the way those people conflict inside the big what if. So how does this above view of story map into that? Well, in this case, the emotional experience that I'm thinking of is, what does it feel like to live in the universe where this big what if exists? What is it like to be somebody in the middle of all of that? Somebody with their own worldview, somebody with their own life path, somebody with their own choices, their own emotional attachments, their own difficulties. And so we will feel all of that through the people that we're presented with, through their dilemmas, through their struggles, through their triumphs. And that what if could be anything. It could be pre-modern, modern, postmodern. It doesn't matter, because all of those things come with their own varieties of emotional experience. There's a lot of talk right now about things like, with the success of the Backrooms movie, there's a lot of talk of the idea of liminal spaces and the emotional content associated with those things, which can include nostalgia or dread. So even in a postmodern world, we have this real hunger for emotional feelings of some kind. And I think that the more tuned we are to evoking how those things can come through our work, the more successful we're going to be, regardless of what the subject matter is. It's like when people wax rhapsodic about The Lord of the Rings. They're not really talking about the world building. That's nice, but that's not really what it's all about. It's about the emotional experience that they have when they go through this whole epic quest with Frodo and his friends. Or to choose something completely different, Blade Runner, the Los Angeles of 2019, very superficially entrancing and sleek and dark. The real meat of the story is in the way the replicants are longing for more life, and how Deckard realizes that he shares that feeling with them. and only comes to realize that after a terrible struggle of being on essentially the wrong side of the conflict. And even something that at first seemed to me to be very emotionally sterile turned out to have tremendous reservoirs of emotion. 2001: A Space Odyssey. There's a huge amount of emotion in this story. It's just not in the place that you would think of it. It's about the longing for all of humanity to push its own boundaries, to know more and see more. Don't tell me you don't feel your heart swell at least a little bit when you're hearing the strains of Thus Spake Zarathustra over the side of the Star Child. So the more different kinds of experiences, of emotional experiences, that you can come up with an audience to have, the more diverse a piece of work you're likely to get. What is all this going to feel like through the eyes of different people? Not just someone that's a stand-in for you. This, by the way, is one of the things that people will geek out over Dostoevsky about, who I'm also a big fan of. He had this ability to have all of these different characters embodying such drastically dissimilar and clashing worldviews. And for him, that was the best way to get them to show all of the discord and difficulty of the age that they were living in. So for what we're all trying to do, whatever kind of fantastic fiction we're writing, it's about having the audience undergo an emotional experience. And that's hard to do well. Resonant emotions are tough to write, no matter what kind of story you're doing, because we have to know a little bit about the emotions in question ourselves. We have to have felt a little bit of that from the inside. And you can get some of that by, say, reading something that is very well written that taps into that kind of an emotion. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to find something of yourself there to bring to the table. Whatever it is that you can bring of yourself, of your own lived experience into your material that has the emotional resonances you're looking for, even if it seems too fantastic to accept, that's going to pay off. And it's super important to learn how to do this, to practice it, to read as widely as you can to see how other authors did it. Not just to see what they put on the page, but where were they getting it from? I didn't really understand, for instance, a lot of what Philip K. Dick was putting on the page in his books until I read the various biographies that had been written about him. And it became much clearer to me what he was tapping into and drawing on and how he was transmuting it. And I said, then I have a similar mission. It's not that I have to write autobiographies. It's not that I have to make everything in my books have a one-to-one connection to something in my life, but they should be informed by it, and they should be informed by it emotionally. What did it feel like to do X? And is there somebody in my story who's going to feel X? And can I use that as a way to help show that how they're feeling X that much more realistically and credibly to the reader? Because at the end of the day, I keep thinking about something that was actually brought up to me in a very different context. It was brought up to me in the context of behavior generally. People may remember a lot of things about you, but the one thing that they remember most about you is how you made them feel. They may not remember how clever you were or how smart you were or how adept you were, but they are never going to forget how you made them feel. And I feel like that's the same thing for any book that you write, for any story that you write, that what matters most is what you're going to leave the audience with. What flavor are you going to leave in their mouth? And it doesn't even have to be because you leave them happy all the time. You can leave them sad as long as you make them feel that it was worth it. One of the books that I'm finishing right now has a very sad ending, but I busted my butt to make sure that people got to that ending and said, "Oh man, it was worth it still." So you always want to know how it is that you can take the fantastic ideas that you have and enrich them with the emotional currents that are in your own life. And that's not going to be easy, but it's going to be super worth it. And it's going to make your stories so much more memorable and alive. And that's really why any of us read these things. It's because we want to feel something. We want to have an experience with a capital E. So I hope some of this was helpful. And until the next time, stay curious.